Welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show, brought to you by DataStax Academy, where we bring you the latest news and interview technical experts to help you succeed in building large-scale distributed systems.
Welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show. I'm Cedrick, developer advocate at DataStax, and today I'm with Chris Splinter, product manager at DataStax. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Cedrick. Thanks for having me.
We got a pretty busy week with the release at 6.7, and which a lot of new features, enhancements, performance improvements. We started a couple of episodes on the new features, and today I would like to dive into the most awaited features called the Kafka Connector. So to start with, can you remind us what is Apache Kafka?
Sure. So Apache Kafka is a distributed streaming platform. So distributed means that it runs on many machines. And then the streaming part of that is more, Kafka is great for keeping track of all of the events as they enter the system. So the form of the streaming data is really capturing everything that's happening in the world, and then you can compare that to a table, which kind of gives you the state of the world at a given point of time. And the way that we see Kafka being used a lot, both with our customers and some other use cases that we've seen, is one, if your IT department has this modernization effort that they're going through and they need to take data off of legacy systems and get those into their new modern systems, Apache Kafka can be that middleman, that sort of ETL layer where you take the data off of your legacy system, you put it into Kafka, maybe do some transformations on that data, and then send it to those downstream modern systems that you have. And then we've also seen it with just purely DSE in some microservices architectures where people might write to Kafka first as that buffer layer and then send the data to each DSE cluster that has its own purpose within that microservices architecture. So that's really the main ways that we see Kafka being used with DSE from our customers and in the field. But I mean, Apache Kafka is an amazing technology. It's great for kind of, like I said, bringing in those events and storing them in a log-based fashion to then distribute out to downstream products. But it's very common with our customers, and we just see it growing more and more in popularity in general.
That's true. I also had a chance to visit customer, and Kafka is just everywhere. But we was already able to connect to Kafka. I heard about the SAMACK architecture, Spark, Mesos, Akka, Cassandra, Kafka, or what we used to call the Lambda architectures with the fast data, and it's all about putting data into Kafka, reading, and then crunching data into DSE. So we already could connect and get data from Kafka. So what's new? And what is the new Kafka connector?
Yeah, so just starting with the state of things before we had this Kafka connector, you really had two main options. The first one is that you could write your own custom consumer that would require you to actually write that code, and that would pull exactly what data you wanted off of Kafka and write it to DSE. Or you could use Spark Streaming, which is packaged as part of Apache Spark as well, but it's also in DSE. And then you could write a Spark Streaming job to do the same thing, where you would pull those messages off of Kafka and write them to DSE. Now, Spark Streaming does have some capabilities built in for if you need to do more advanced joins or aggregations on the fly and things like that. Then Spark Streaming might still be what you want to use, even though we have this Kafka connector now. But what the Kafka connector solves is that, first of all, it doesn't require you to write anything. You simply get the jar and you deploy it in the Kafka Connect framework, which we should talk about in a little bit here. And then the second thing is that if you aren't using DSE analytics or don't want to go through the process of learning Spark streaming and writing that Spark streaming job, because all you need to do is simply take the messages from Kafka and throw them into DSE, that's where the Kafka connector comes in. And it works with just regular DSE. You don't need DSE analytics. Again, like I said, you can still use Spark streaming if you need to do some more advanced actions on that data as it's in flight. But the Kafka connector, like I said, it's deployed in the Kafka Connect framework. So if you need to do any transformations and you're using the Kafka connector, your go-to there would be these things that are called single message transforms, which are you would use as plugins to the Kafka Connect framework. Or another option is that you could just do your transformations in Kafka itself, either using Kafka Streams or KSQL. So there's a lot of different options now, but really, just coming back to it, the connector, you don't have to write any custom code, and you don't have to understand and use DSE analytics if you don't want to. And those are really the two big things there.
Yeah, so the scope of the connector, if I understood well, is really getting the data, putting into DSE and do some mappings, not really transformations. And it's all embedded into Kafka. We could say it's Kafka native. You don't need any third-party runtime. And it's running into Kafka Connect. So what about those Kafka Connect? Is it scalable? Is it reliable?
Yeah, so just taking a step back here. So Kafka Connect is distributed with Apache Kafka, but there's a couple different concepts. There's the Apache Kafka brokers, which are actually the servers that are storing and reading those messages, storing, reading, and writing those messages. It's all done on the brokers. Kafka Connect is its own separate framework that you deploy these connectors in. You can deploy source connectors or you can deploy sink connectors. Our connector is a sink, which means that it takes those messages from the Apache Kafka brokers and writes them to DSE, and the data is it's the sink in DSE.
Okay.
That's just the terminology that's used there. But the Kafka Connect framework itself really gives the user a lot of built-in benefits, and those benefits are fault tolerance. You can run multiple Kafka Connect workers in a group together, and if one of those machines goes down, you still have other machines that can continue to process those messages from Kafka to DSE. So you have that fault tolerance built in. And then because it is distributed, if you need to scale, because let's say that you're just writing more data to your Kafka brokers, you can just add another machine in there, another DataStax Apache Kafka Connector instance, and it can join the existing group that you have to keep up with that throughput on that of the messages as they're being written to the brokers. So the Kafka Connect framework really is this established framework for deploying and running connectors, and that is what we and how we built our connector. We built it to plug into this Kafka Connect framework. So really, as a user, you download the connector, you throw it on your workers, you make sure that it's in the plugin path of those workers, and then you configure your mapping of pulling whatever topics and fields you want in Kafka to DSE, and that's all you got to do.
Okay, go.
Ask me about the mapping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I was supposed to. I will ask about the mapping, the format. Do we support all the Kafka averages, unstruct stuff? Which kind of mapping can we do? One to many, many to one? Yeah, can you give a little about that?
Yeah. So one of our main design goals when we were building this was to make sure that we could account for like almost anything that we would see. We really wanted to make this general purpose. So we built in a very flexible mapping capability into the connector that allows you to, if your data is stored in JSON, Avro, or the native Kafka Connect structs, you can access the specific fields within those data structures and tell the connector exactly which columns in DSE you want to write those Kafka fields to. So there's a lot of flexibility around just you have full control over what data you want to actually take out of Kafka and write to DSE. And we hope that people that use our connector are smart about it, where they're not just wastefully throwing in data that they don't need. We want them to really think about exactly what they're putting into DSE and how they're putting it there. And another piece of functionality that we made sure to build into our connector is the common pattern of denormalization that we see. You can take a single topic in Kafka and write it to 5, 10 different DSE tables if you'd like. And that really lets you write the data as it fits your query patterns on the DSE side. And you can really dictate, you can do anything. You can take multiple topics from Kafka and write them to multiple tables in DSE. There's really no ends to the flexibility of what you're able to do there.
Sure. Yeah, so the best data model with Cassandra is to duplicate. So you can ask the driver, the connector, to duplicate the data for you and insert the data in 2 tables if you need to for your queries. Yeah, I got it. It's so very flexible, I would say. But what about performance? Did you get any benchmark metrics? What can you say about performance?
Well, everybody loves performance. So that was another one of our main design goals when we were going about building this thing. Some of the feedback that we had received from customers previously was that the solutions that they were using beforehand, whether that be something custom that they wrote, whether it was something going on with the Spark streaming job that they configured, or whether it was another connector, performance was it was coming up a lot as an issue. And so when we were building the Kafka connector, we actually looked back at what we did with the DataStax bulk loader, which came out with DSE 6. And during the process of building the bulk loader, we actually did a lot of research into just what are the best techniques of writing to Cassandra and writing to DataStax Enterprise. And with this connector, we definitely took a lot of those learnings and applied them here as well. So yes, we were very happy with the performance numbers that we saw compared to other solutions that exist in the testing that we did before we released this connector. And again, that it built a lot off of the work that we did in DS bulk. So yeah, we're happy about that.
Okay, so if I'm using that connector, can I access those kind of metrics, latencies, number of messages per second, stuff like that?
Yeah, so the connector itself is actually using the DataStax Java driver under the hood. So a lot of the CQL request metrics that it's using in the driver, we surface those in the connector as well. There's a setting in the configuration file called JMX, and that's true by default. So by default, the connector will be reporting metrics. But specifically, yes, you can see the latencies and the throughput histograms for the connector writes to DSE. We also surface things like just the record count. If there's any failures in there, we surface that as a metric. So as an operator or as somebody who's deployed this thing, yes, we set those metrics reporting to true by default on purpose, because you really should be keeping an eye on these things just to make sure that that the data is flowing as you expect it to.
Okay, that's really neat. Okay. Is there any lower version level we need to be compliant in terms of Kafka or DSE? Which version can I use with the tool?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So even though we released this connector with DSE 6.7, it works with previous DSE versions going back to DSE 5.0. So if you're on DSE 5.0x, DSE 5.1x, DSE 6.0x, or DSE 6.7x, the connector works with all of those DSE versions. And it also, so the connector can be used with the DataStax distribution of Cassandra, it can be used with DataStax Basic, and it can be used with DataStax Enterprise. So across the product suite, going back a few versions here, the connector will work for you.
Okay, so it's included in all the distribution we could provide, which is cool. So to get more information about the driver, you can hit the official documentations, and we will provide all the links in the description below. But not only the documentation, we also created some small trainings available on DataStax Academy. It's a small course, 6 videos, but still you get all the spiky details about the mapping and samples. And speaking of samples, we will have a couple of blog posts on the Academy as well with working samples. We'll provide you a GitHub repository with the Kafka samples, even with a nice UI you can play with. And we also have created right now, you can download that, a white paper just to explain what we said now about what we could expect from the driver and the connector and how it's work together. So a lot of things to browse, and we will provide you everything in the description below. Apart from that,
and go download that connector. And as always, I love hearing feedback. If there's any feature requests, any issues that are going on, we want to hear it. So it is a Kafka Connector Slack channel on the DataStax Academy Slack, and I'll be in there. So feel free to ask any questions or provide any feedback at any time.
Okay, so thank you, Chris, to have been with us again. It was cool. And until now, see you next time for the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us again for the Distributed Data Show. We love your feedback, so go to the Distributed Data Show page on DataStax Academy and tell us what you think. You can also find us on the DataStax Academy YouTube channel, or find our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get great podcasts. While you're there, make sure and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.